How much money do I need to retire? Well, let's just skip the clickbait and get straight to the point. In order to retire today, you need to take however much money you spend each year and divide that by 0.04. Now that is just the short answer for how much money you need to retire, but there are some caveats to that. For example, why did I pick the number 0.04? In order for most people to reach the point of retirement, they're going to need a lot of money saved up. Now, unless you make an obscene amount of money, pretty much the only way that you can actually build up enough money to actually retire forever is to invest your money in some way. The goal isn't just to save up a big chunk of money and then slowly pull money out of that until that money disappears. Instead, the goal is to build up enough money that it generates income for you, and then you can live off that income for all time. Now, if we look at the average stock market returns over the last 100 years, we can see that it returns on average around 8% per year. Now, the problem is this is just an average. It's not consistent. It turns out when you really dive into the numbers that you can withdraw around 4% of any money invested in the stock market every single year without ultimately depleting the principal that you need to live on. The goal of the 4% rule is that you withdraw 4% of however much you had saved up the first year you retire. However, the year after that, you have to account for inflation and the fact that everything costs more money. At this point, you're withdrawing a tiny bit more than 4%, and the year after that, a little bit more than that, and so on and so forth. By saving up enough money that you only need to withdraw 4% in your first year of retirement, you can make sure that you have enough money to live out the rest of your life, even with the costs of inflation. Now, there are some factors which could affect the 4% rule a little bit. For example, if you receive a large pension, you probably don't need to save quite as much money because part of your expenses are going to be covered by your pension every single year. Additionally, if you have certain other types of investments, maybe rental properties, you might bring in different amounts of money already, so you don't have to have quite as much saved up to reach your 4% rule. But it's a good rule of thumb for anybody who just wants to keep it simple and just invest all of their money into index funds and leave it and not think about it until they retire. Something else that you might need to think about is that there are different types of retirement. Up until now, I've been talking about a very traditional type of retirement where you basically work your entire life and then retire around age 65 and then live out your remaining days. Now, there are actually several movements out there of people who want to break out of this cycle of working their entire lives so that they can actually enjoy retirement at a much younger age. One of these groups is the FIRE movement, or Financial Independence Retire Early. This group really focuses on saving as much money as possible early on so that you can actually retire at an extremely young age, sometimes as young as 30, 35, 40 years old. In order to do this, they follow the exact same principle that I laid out for you earlier. They try to save up a big enough nest egg that they can withdraw 4% every single year without ever running out of money. The difference is they do it at a much younger age. Really, the only way to accomplish this is to make either a really high income or to just save a huge amount of your income. An alternative to the FIRE method is CoastFi or BaristaFi. With this method, your goal is to save up a big chunk of money and then invest it in the stock market without adding anything to it. By the time you reach the final age that you want to be at when you retire, this money will have grown into a big enough nest egg to support you from then on. The difference is, in the meantime, until you actually retire, you continue to work a job just to support your own living expenses. The advantage to this is it gives you a lot of freedom in that you can move around, you can live wherever you want to, because all you need to support is however much it costs you to live day to day. If you want to learn more about CoastFi, I made an entire video about it. It's actually a really interesting topic. In addition to CoastFi and FIRE, there are also some other retirement methods. There's LeanFire, where basically you don't need to have that much saved because you're just going to limit your expenses as much as possible because the sole goal is to not have to work. On the other end of the spectrum, there's FatFire. This generally requires you to have a really high-paying job. The goal here is to save up a ton of money so that you can have a lot of yearly income and you don't have to sacrifice on any luxuries or anything in retirement, and yet you're still trying to retire early. Like I said, there are a lot of different options on how to retire, but this shouldn't stress you out. Instead, it should give you comfort because there are so many options out there for how you can choose to live the life you want to lead. All you have to do is focus on meeting the 4% rule at some point in your life and understand that once you meet this rule, you are effectively retired, whether or not you decide to keep on working just for fun. One of the important things to know about all of these different methods is the younger you start, the better off you will be. Let's look at this by using a compound interest calculator. Now let's say that you're 30 years old right now and you have $100,000 invested. And you plan to invest that money until you're 65 years old. So if you're 30 years old, that means you have another 35 years that your investment will be returning income. And let's say that you get an 8% interest rate each year. If you add all those numbers up, you'll have $1.5 million by the time you're 65 years old. Now, let's leave everything the same except change your current age to 25, 10 years younger. This means you have 45 years for your money to accumulate compound interest. In that case, your investment will be more than twice as high, even though you're only adding on an additional 10 years at the beginning. This is the real power of time combined with compound interest. Now, because of a lot of the difficulties that people around age 30 have faced, they faced the 2008 recession, they faced really high student loans, the average net worth of a 30-year-old in the United States is only $7,000. Now, with a net worth of $7,000, they're going to need to build up to close to a net worth of $1 million in order to withdraw $40,000 a year and still meet the 4% rule. However, if you can just build up your net worth at an earlier age, you can put yourself far ahead of the average in the United States. Now, we could keep talking all day about what the numbers are behind retirement and how much money you need to save, but I think it's also important to get into the details of how you actually save up that money and where to put it. If you're saving for retirement, there's basically a hierarchy in different places to put your money to maximize your gains. The first option that you're going to want to take is if you work at a company that offers a 401k match, you want to take that match because it's effectively free money right off the bat. Next, any additional income you have, I would put toward paying down high interest debt. This would be debt over around 5% per year. The reason is if you're paying out 5, 6, 7% interest every single year on a debt, that's basically the same thing as getting a guaranteed loss on your investments equal to 5, 6, 7% every single year. You need to get this paid off as quickly as possible so that you can use the extra income that's stuck going to that debt to go towards investments instead. The next option that I would invest in is an IRA. Now, there's two types of IRAs, a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA. A Roth IRA is basically an IRA where you pay all the taxes up front, and then all of your investments will continue to compound and gain interest tax-free forever going forward. In a traditional IRA, you don't pay anything now in taxes, but as you continue to accrue gains, when you pull that money out, you'll pay taxes then. In general, the younger you are, the better an option it is to invest into a Roth IRA because your money is going to be growing for a longer period. Also, if by the time you retire, you think that you're going to be making more money than you are right now, it actually makes more sense to pay the taxes now than later. Now, if you think that you're making more money now than you will at the time you retire, let's say you're planning to retire next year and you're currently at the peak of your income earning ability, well, in that case, it would make more sense to invest in a traditional IRA. Now, an IRA, to be clear, isn't a specific type of investment, it's just an account. It's an account that's defined by the government for tax purposes. Now, because it's defined by the government, there are limits on when you can actually contribute to an IRA. For example, the current cap in 2020 on contributions to your IRA is $6,000 every year. Now, if you want to invest in a Roth IRA, you have to make less than $139,000 if you file singly on your taxes, or $206,000 if you file jointly. If you are over this amount, you can do something called a backdoor Roth IRA, where basically you put your money into a traditional IRA and then immediately move that over to a Roth IRA. It ultimately results in the same thing. However, you can only contribute $6,000 to an IRA each year, unless you're over 50 years old, in which case you can contribute an extra $1,000 in catch-up contributions. Once you've maxed out your IRA with $6,000 each year, the next option is to go back to your 401k and max that out. You're allowed to contribute $19,500 to your 401k starting in 2020. Additionally, your employer can contribute to your 401k for you, up to $57,000 in 2020. Similarly, if you're self-employed, you can actually contribute this yourself because you play the role of both employee and employer. And now, similar to the IRA, if you're over 50 years old, you can actually invest a little bit more into your 401k because you can do catch-up contributions of an additional $6,500 every single year. Now, again, like the IRA, there are two different types of 401ks which your employer might offer. There's just your regular old traditional 401k, and then there's also a Roth 401k. These work exactly the same as Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs. Basically, one you pay the taxes now, the other one you pay the taxes later. Deciding which one to invest in should follow the exact same process as with the IRA. Now, once you've maxed out both your IRA and your 401k, you're kind of past the point of most retirement accounts. At this point, you have some options. One example is you can invest in a 529 plan, which is basically a college savings plan for your potential kids. This is a good idea if you plan to have kids and you plan to send those kids to college, because college ain't cheap. Although one caveat I will note to using the 529 plan is if the plan is not in either the name of the college student or the parent of the college student at the time that they pull the money out, colleges will actually drop students' financial aid based on the amount of money that they're getting in income from their 529 plan. So for example, if you're a grandparent and you want to save some money in a 529 plan, you're going to want to talk to a tax professional to try to figure out the best way to do that without impacting their financial aid. Now, another option, if say you're not planning on saving for kids, or maybe you've already contributed as much as you want to your college plan, is an HSA, or health savings account. An HSA works basically the same as a Roth IRA. You can actually invest in the stock market. You can grow your investment over time. The only difference is with an HSA, you can only pull the money out to spend on medical expenses. Now, the definition of medical expenses is pretty broad here. For example, you might be able to spend it on sunscreen or painkillers in your particular HSA. At this point, we've pretty much gone through all the different tax-advantaged accounts you can use while planning for retirement, but there are still options you can do if you max out all of these other options. For example, you could invest in real estate. One of the huge advantages to real estate is once you buy a property, you can depreciate that property against your taxes. Once you're making enough money to max out all these other categories, taxes are going to become really important to you. Additionally, you can always invest it in the stock market. You can invest in ETFs and index funds. You can invest in small businesses if you want to. Really, you can invest in whatever you want. But the important thing is to keep on investing so you can keep growing your net worth. If, however, you do not want to continue investing this money, I would say the next best option for use of this money is paying off low interest debt. This would be debt that has an interest rate of maybe 1 to 4%. Now, normally, I personally wouldn't pay off this debt because I can take this money and invest it somewhere else and get a higher rate of return than the debt cost me. That being said, if I'm not planning on using this extra money for investments, then there's no reason to keep the debt around and I should pay it off because it's just costing me money and interest every year. If you just follow these steps in the order that I listed out, you should be able to maximize your retirement savings and retire with either as much money as possible or as early as possible for your current situation. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, and if you don't want to miss out on any future videos that I release, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you next time.